everybody. Welcome back as Tyler and I go through Rebecca McLaughlin's book, Is Christmas Unbelievable? And we are now into chapter 3, How Can You Believe in a Virgin Birth?
I don't know. How do you?
Well, we're going to explore that tonight.
Yeah. So to get started, you usually always ask me. So what was your first takeaway? I'll beat you to the punch today.
Yeah, well, I mean, just right off the bat, when she talks about that the fact that the miracles of Christmas should not be ignored, because if we believe in the God who created the universe, then creating a baby should not be a problem.
Yes.
And so that, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, I think she takes a big swing at the main point that this is within the realm of possibility for a God who's created everything. And I like how she tied it to creation to begin with.
Yeah.
Because I think that's important to understand that God is a creating God, and also from Adam, and of course Jesus is the second Adam.
Yeah.
There's this new creation, and then of course he invites us to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So what was yours?
Mine, I loved her little note at the bottom that this was the year before her daughter told everyone Santa wasn't real. So that was
Overseeing kids' earmuffs.
Yeah, earmuffs. Yeah. I really enjoyed this whole chapter, and there's not really I would probably just say the whole chapter 3. There's just so much. One thing I love about her writing is she backs up everything she has to say. And, that's not always how writing these days is. It's kind of, you better believe me, or, And that's been a lot of what I've read in here. She just backs it up. And if she doesn't have the proof, she kind of just says, I don't have the proof, but that's the point of believing in something. You have to have your heart behind it if you really believe in it. So,
And she in this book, she gives a good, I would say, a sip of all the stuff that is out there, because you could dive into all sorts of aspects, especially when it comes to, can we believe, creation, science, and of course she gets into that, and I said there's just so much out there, and of course there's some great stuff, and also there's some bad stuff, and bad stuff on both sides. There's some stuff Christians put out there. I'm like, what in the world are you doing? And of course atheists put out stuff out there, and I'm like, this was settled like 500 years ago. Well, just like with the book on Jesus being a real person.
Oh,
that's settled. Why are you rehashing stuff that that's been?
It's just they have the blinders on sometimes. They just can't look outside their lane. They believe what they want to believe, and they don't want to have the proof. Where a lot of the stuff we have, not just proof, but we have firsthand accounts.
Firsthand accounts. There's evidence just spilling everywhere. And so that first section she kicks off there, Jesus' conception and the worlds. And so again, that link between, God working at the beginning of creation, and of course, God working and creating Jesus, giving him to Mary and for that pregnancy. Yeah. And of course, we kind of talked about that already, but in that next section there is titled, Isn't Belief in a Creator God Outdated? And she debunks that, even though that's a very popular opinion, particularly in our American context. Yeah.
I don't know if I've mentioned on this before. I've mentioned several other people. I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic elementary school, and one of my teachers actually wasn't Catholic, which was kind of taboo, I guess.
That's surprising.
So she didn't teach our religion class, but we just had a discussion one day, and we were talking about that. We had several kids that were there because mom and dad told them to go, and that's where you're going. So they were asking questions outside the Catholic faith, and one of them was creation. So she was Christian. I can't remember what she actually was.
What her flavor was.
Yeah. Where she went on Sundays. But one of the things that always struck out to me is she never said the Big Bang was true. She never said it wasn't. But she also said in the Bible, it talks about, the 7 days is when he did everything. A lot of people who are atheists think that he did all of this in our weekly
seven literal days
as 24 hours, 60 minutes and an hour, where that's not that's an earthly day. That doesn't necessarily mean that's a God's day. So, and that's where I've always had people who don't believe. They say that there's no way he could have done everything in 7 days. I believe he could, but at the same time, that's not necessarily what it's saying. Like, you have to gotta give it a little bit to get from there. And so that was one thing that when I was reading this that kept coming to mind was everyone looks at things so literally as if it happened today. If God took 7 days, he started today, and 7 days from today he had another world made up. Like, no, that's not necessarily
so in relation to that, one of the problems that some Christian fundamentalists have are the same problems atheists have. To look at the Bible and read it in such a way that's like, that's not what it's saying, and that would not be the literal intention of the Hebrew author. A good book, if anybody's really interested, you want to go into some of the science of the 7 days. There's a book by John Lennox, Lennox, and it's titled 7 Days That Divide the World. And it's a book actually probably just only a little thicker than this. It was really fun and easy read, and I could listen to John Lennox for hours. He's awesome. And so if you really want to get into some of the perspectives, Christian perspectives on those 7 days, I think it's an excellent book for anyone to dive into.
Well, put it in the chat if you want us to do a podcast about that as well.
Yeah.
We're only got a couple more chapters left of this one, and
that's right.
I wouldn't mind looking into that because that's always been interesting to me. And that was 6th grade. That was a long time ago. That still sticks in my head. And it wasn't even a class or anything. It was just a discussion. So,
and John Lennox, he's a scientist and a mathematician. So he's a guy in the scientific field. So he's not just some pastor coming out of the woods. He's a guy who's been there in the science field
for sure.
So she quotes here in that section some numbers about how Christianity is actually going to grow. Islam's going to grow a little bit, but actually there's a projection that atheism is actually going to go down. Which doesn't surprise me, because the church is just booming in Africa and Southeast Asia, especially China, which she references. But also one thing that's also we hear reports from is in Muslim countries, people who are denied the gospel, who are denied a Bible, are having dreams where they're meeting Jesus.
Wow.
So it's like, who knows what could happen by 2030, which is only 7 years away, or by 2060.
Yeah. Just imagine, like, not even being able to read something even like this, let alone the Bible, and you're having dreams of Jesus, coming to see you while you sleep. Like, that has to be so motivating.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And for them, because in Islam, they view Jesus as a prophet, not as the savior. And, to have that kind of like Saul's experience with Jesus on the road to Damascus, kind of a wake up call. Is like, actually, the Christians are kind of right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is an amazing,
But it's not just in Muslim countries. I've also heard, I think it was out of China, somebody out of the Baptist tradition in the underground church who, unfortunately, they're anonymous, so you can't reference a person. Where the report was that they're also seeing people rise from the dead. And with some of the miracles I've seen from folks, I mean, my own eyes in Southeast Asia. The Holy Spirit can do whatever. Yeah. I mean, if Jesus says, we're going to do the same things, and of course he raises, Jairus' daughter and of course Lazarus. I mean, who knows what's actually happening? We don't hear it because they come out of countries that are on lockdown, especially on Christians.
And speaking of the rising from the dead, I'm a real TV junkie. Like, I like the real stories. I'm not a big fantasy guy, but there is so many stories out there of people who have been pronounced dead on the table or in a vehicle, get in the ambulance, come back to life, and speak of the light they see, tell God, who they believe God or Jesus, telling them it's not your time yet, and them waking up. Like that, to me, that is firsthand. That's hard to make up.
Yeah.
Especially when you have doctors backing up their story. It's not just like me saying, yep, I've seen God when I had a car accident 6 years ago. I said dead. There's proof with it, you know, just like what they say here. A lot of the stuff she backs up here, and it's just hard to not believe that, you know, especially if you were that person, obviously. So like, how can people say there's no way he could have came back from the dead when it happens all the time? I've probably watched 100 of those. You know, like people have died and came back.
Well, that reminds me of two stories that I've read or heard. There was one where a guy was giving his testimony. He was in some sort of industrial accident, and he's a Christian, and he said he kept to himself. But there was this accident that took the lives of many guys that he worked with, and he says he found himself in a line that was going up, and he saw in a line going down one of the guys he worked with, and the guy's looking at him and screaming at him, goes, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me?"
That gave me goosebumps.
And there's a holiness preacher in the early 1900s by G.C. Bevington. Actually, publishes a journal on his experience. He talks about the miracles that he's experienced, and one where he had a broken bone, and it was just, there was no help for him. But he prayed, and he had a vision that the bone started, you know, molding and going back together and healing as if nothing happened. And so he goes back to the doctor, and of course, X-rays were very expensive then. You know, gets the money, and the doctor's like, "Well, I don't expect there to be any change." He's like, "No, X-ray, take a look at it," and perfect, like nothing happened. It's just crazy.
When you were saying that, it reminded me of your story, the revival you went to as well. Like, miracles aren't just fixing physical. Like, sometimes it is just bringing people back, and
spiritual and ill.
And that's what I believe, anyways. And that's all I can say is what I believe.
It leaves a mark, and he's like, I can't deny that because I saw it happen.
And there's a lot of things in my life that I know God was there with me, because it would change the course of everything that was there. So, you know, miracles don't have to be huge either. So they can just be making a right instead of a left, and you don't even know it.
Or just receiving, you know, a moment of peace. Because there was times where my anxiety before giving a sermon was so high, it felt like someone placed their hand on my back, and I was pacing around. So I know no one's behind me. And just all of a sudden, my body would just relax a little bit.
You're doing what you're supposed to do.
So. there's times I was like Moses, where I was like, can you send somebody else, please? And then she pivots right into, after those statistics, into, hasn't science disproved Christianity? Which is a fun question to engage.
They try. They try. But I also think more often than not, it proves it. You know, and like some of the items she talks about, I'm trying to remember. Maybe it wasn't this. It was actually in our Easter, the one we did with, I can't remember.
It's Lee Strobel.
Yeah, Lee. I knew the first name was Lee. But in our group, we got to talking about some of the things like this, and actually talked about the resurrection. Obviously, it was Easter, but and how people were trying to prove that he never actually died. And that because he was laying on the cold stone and all of that. And it's like, you know, you're taking this a little far-fetched, and you know, it's, some of it just can't be proven. There's millions of things in the world that we can't prove, that science can't prove, that we know is true. And so it's just kind of, it's always, because it's a little bit out there, not out there for us, but some people, they think that's out there. They don't believe it, that it's fake. And but because science can't prove it, but there's some things you just have to believe in. And there's too many people, like we've talked about, firsthand accounts that weren't as far out as what they claim, that reviewed that, and you could ask that were there. And so probably went a little long.
No, you're good. Because scientists will accuse Christians of believing in the God of the gap. So they'll believe, you know, God's right there until science discovers it. And the thing is, and this is where sometimes Christians go a little too far, is the Bible's not a science book.
Yeah.
And even then with the miracles, it talks about something that happens out of the ordinary, not something that's regular. And so as the Bible talks about, the days of creation and, the existence of stuff, I mean, that aligns with, what we know from scientific evidence or scientific theories like the Big Bang Theory, which is, I think, just, God's, speaking loudly.
Yeah.
Or maybe snapped his fingers. Who knows?
Yeah. And that's what I've always believed too is, Big Bang may have happened, but the question no one could ever answer me is something just doesn't just start.
Yeah. Everything has a cause.
Like I have to snap my fingers. I have to, I have to do something. There's just no spontaneous, which, well, I guess they talked about this in here, but like maybe that did happen. And to me, that makes more sense with the whole not in 7 actual earthly days. It's, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It's just the thought that I was like, that's one of the things.
In my notes, I got a list of whole thoughts. So you're good. Feel free to interrupt. One of the lines that stood out to me in this section, it says they're too stubborn or deluded to admit it. Believing in science, so the story goes, is the opposite of believing in God, but this simply isn't true. And of course, she gives evidence that a lot of scientists were and are Christian, and many scientific advances came because the goal was to figure out how God was at work. Yeah. Not a God of the gaps, but how God set things into motion so that we could better understand the world. Yeah. And so I, of course, pulled up my little tablet here. And here's why the line stood out to me, that being stubborn or deluded. There was a series of books that happened to come out because Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion. And of course, there's a lot of responses to that. And of course, the word delusion got thrown around, so everyone seemed to be delusional. Yeah. But this was inside the. So there was a book called The Devil's Delusion, and it was actually written by an atheist named David Belinsky. A scientist in like 2 different fields, and a real honest approach at his own side. And so this is what was in the front dust cover of this book. Has anyone provided proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it's not religious thought? Close enough. Yeah. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? Close enough. And does anything in the sciences or their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. Yeah. That was an atheist talking about, the scientist on his own side of belief that, this intellectual honesty or dishonesty.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of it too is, I listen to so many different types of podcasts, and one of them is obviously Joe Rogan Show, #1 podcast in the world. But what I love about him is he'll bring anyone on. It don't matter red or white, blue or green, whatever, Christian or atheist. And one of the things that always seem to come up when he has a scientist on is they always talk about peer-reviewed studies, but the amount of documentation that comes out to only support what they have to say. That's the only time they will throw that out there. Yeah. So a lot of this, how many things agree with the Christian faith that's not being reported because it would hurt what they are saying. Yes. And that's what I also think of a lot when people try to use science, there's so much out there that no one ever reported on because it hurts what they have to say.
But and I think part of that
and probably vice versa.
Yeah. And they insulate themselves into that echo chamber because even Stephen Hawking, who, so a couple instances, apparently he gave a speech back in the 90s, I think it was, about, are we determined or not? Are we dancing to our DNA, as Dawkins would say? And the conclusion was, from what I heard from someone who was there, is that he says, since we don't know if we're determined or not, we might as well not be. Yeah. And he says the whole room groaned that he made this argument that we are determined, basically we're no more than machines.
Yeah.
But then since we really don't know for sure, well, we're not really machines. Yeah. And then there was, in one of his more later books, he stated philosophy was dead. And which, of course, ticked off the philosophy department over there in England. Yeah. But also, what was interesting was that in that book, he makes philosophical statements after he makes that statement. I'm like, yeah, dude. And of course, you're a scientist. Yeah. And so I can imagine the head of philosophy department, when he spoke out, was like, dude, stay in your lane.
Yeah, for sure.
But of course, again, we're poking at the atheists. There's some Christians too that is like, okay, you're exaggerating claims and evidence to where, and even, there's people who still believe that the Earth is flat. Like, come on.
Come on. We have proof. Yeah.
So we're into the part that where science is proved Christianity, and
we want to look for it.
Well, and she brings up Han Halverson, who makes the argument that, of the intellectual honesty of scientific pursuit, and for him, Christianity, a Christian worldview perspective when engaging science made a lot more sense than an atheistic point of view. Which, with all these Christian scientists out there, it's like, well, it seems to make sense because, and of course, if you're a Christian, you're not, if you're following your faith, you're not going to lie about results. Yeah. But again, Christianity, the Bible's not a science book. No. And so there's not going to be as much conflict as people think there's going to be. And then he goes right into, Russell Coburn, or Coburn, I think it's Coburn, on how he became a Christian. And it wasn't the scientific evidence, or the lack of scientific evidence for an atheist point of view. It was the fact that he experiences Jesus' love. Yeah. And so I think that's another thing too, is sometimes, we get this information and all of a sudden we want to start throwing it at people, and that was one of the failures of many Christian apologists in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, is that I don't know what got in their heads, but it was like thought they could argue people into faith. Yeah. And of course, then it got kind of regulated to the debate stage, and I'm like,
on a debate stage, you're never going to change someone's opinion. I've learned that. No. A lot of it is kind of like what he said here, and I feel like what we try to do here is show them the love of Jesus. Give them the evidence and let them make that decision for themselves. We have free will for a reason. We can believe what we want to believe. You're not going to force anyone to believe something, especially something as strong as this, without them, I don't want to say convinced, but convinced to, or believe that Jesus and God are our Lord and Saviors.
Well, and that's where it takes that encounter with God in Christ through the Holy Spirit, and that's why we believe in things like prevenient grace, and that's where we believe the Holy Spirit is at work in the non-believer's life, so that hopefully they will get into a position so that they can see Jesus and they can say yes to Jesus. One apologist put it brilliantly like this. He says, "Say you're trying to warm a room. You want to convert somebody, trying to convert somebody." And so the goal of the evangelist or the apologist is to move the curtains, to move the barriers. Yeah. Now, moving the curtain does not warm the room. The sun does. Yeah. God is the sun. And so God will use you to help, remove the riffraff, the paraphernalia, the stuff, the junk. But it's only God that's going to be able to make an impact on that person.
Yeah. I truly do believe that as well. It's what brought me back, honestly. Yeah. It was, I spent a little while away from the church environment. I still believed, and obviously, but I wasn't where I should be. And now I feel like with the family we've created here, that I'm very happy with where I'm at today. So, that I can attest to Burlington United Methodist Church. So,
And the one thing that stood out to me and was there on page 39 when Russell Coburn says, "I wasn't shopping for religion. It wasn't that I went out and did careful study of all the world's thinkers and then I plumped for Jesus.
Yeah.
It was that he found me, and that my faith is a relationship that I wasn't seeking." And I think that's really important because, again, our faith isn't dependent on a piece of paper of lists of stuff. It's not a person. And of course that, God himself came into the flesh.
Yeah.
And it's not personality either of a pastor or human beings. It's in God.
Yeah. And I love John 3:16. I will always think of Tim Tebow with this, but, and that he was talking about that one particular verse is kind of what hit it for him when he joined that study group. And, the best part of that is a little history sports lesson for you. So if you guys don't know who Tim Tebow is, he was a quarterback for Florida, but a very strong Christian.
Yes. Very positive guy.
Yeah, just positive in general. Very great person. During the national championship game, he wore an eye black and it said John 3:16 on it. Every game he had a different verse. And with this, this was probably in 2005 or 6, with Google the way it was, you could see the top searches. Mm-hmm. That was the top search for a week and a half.
Very cool. I did not know that.
What was John 3:16? So just him wearing that on his face, clearly visible through his helmet, in a football game where 100,000 people, it said it was searched almost 1 billion times.
Wow.
Just because so many people were going back to it. So every time I see that, that's what I think of, and how something as little as that could start someone's faith back up.
Yeah.
And just trying to see what that is. So
we watched, Alan and I watched American Ninja Warrior.
Yeah.
And some of them would, a shirt or on their shoes, or they wore shorts, they would, write something on their leg. And of course, what's the Bible passage this week? What's that?
Yeah. And tattoos.
Yep.
I have a friend of mine that it's Proverbs, but I can't remember what it is. But he told me I get asked often enough that I got it memorized, and just little things like that. You don't realize how something as little as eye black, a tattoo, or writing something on your shoes can affect someone's faith in the way it has.
Yep.
So that's sorry for the tangent on not the off the exit, but it is, every time I think that's very similar to kind of what Russell was saying too, is he definitely wasn't planning on, he just, I don't have anything better to do. Let's go to church. And he found himself a group that brought him in with open arms. And again, John 3:16, I think, finished it up for him.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So after a story with Russell Coburn there, of course, she goes a little bit more into, their observations. She mentions Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project. And I remember him showing a picture of a rose window from a cathedral, and like a picture of like DNA, and just the color variation was just beautiful. And just someone's imagination with all that stained glass, it's just inspiring. And then that next section right after that is the virgin birth of the universe. Then she talks about the Big Bang and the Christian scientists that found that. And so she mentions that atheist physicists, mocked the idea, that they resisted it, and of course there's been so many other sides saying, well, the Big Bang, proves God isn't real. It's like, wait.
No, it actually doesn't.
The universe has an origin, and everyone can agree on that, but you're going to fight this?
Yeah. And it's just crazy how closed-minded people can be. And I can be that way too. I'm not, Christians are definitely that as well. I'm not trying to say all atheists are closed-minded, because they're not. But some people just, you hear it once, that's their opinion, and it's going to stay. And like I said, I can't be closed-minded. I try to keep it open and at least listen to what you have to say. And I think that's a lot of this. Like there's proof in the pudding at the end of the day.
Well, and that's where as much beneficial as like scientists and stuff that gets put out like on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. Unfortunately, just so much junk gets thrown around that's so wrong that for me, I just is like, okay, give me the scientist book and I'll read it.
Yeah.
Like the Berlinski quote. I mean, I have that book.
Yeah.
It's getting closer to the front of my
line.
list. But I have it in hand because I want to read, what he sees as an atheist, but also seeing some of the disingenuousness of those like Dawkins and some of the arguments by Hawkins, because if Dawkins is right that we're just dancing to our DNA, then you can't morally explain away murder, rape, and all those evil things if people are just
love. There's so many like sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but if we're just animals at the end of the day, I know my dog loves me, but he doesn't know what that is.
Yeah.
The mouse doesn't know. All it's looking for is its next meal. We would, in my opinion, we would not have our free will to make choices for ourselves. We would not know what love truly is.
Yeah.
We wouldn't know what hate is.
Yeah.
My dog doesn't know what hate is. He knows that, if someone kicks him, you raise your leg back, he's probably going to shudder away in fear, thinking you're going to kick him, not knowing the rest of it, And I really think there's so much more than just our physical bodies, our mind. Like it's, we have so many feelings that if there wasn't a creator, someone made us in his image, I don't just believe this just happens, if, especially like with, they say we come from apes, like I just don't, if evolution is so big, why haven't they evolved with us? Like,
well, and here's one of the things that doesn't get talked about, and so this is pointed out to me by Christian scientists, is that when you look at the fossil record, you see these explosions of like sea creatures and land creatures, and especially with he calls it the pre-Cambrian explosion, and you just all these things coming into existence seemingly at the same time. Yeah. To where he's like, you really don't see in the fossil record a progression. Yeah. Of evolution, because even the famous picture from Darwin about the finches, they found that there was just an adaptation to the weather seasons, and so when a season was dry, their beaks would change the way. If it was wet, it would change the way. But if it was normal, it would go back to the normal size. And so, but that stuff like that is actually still in textbooks. Yeah. In schools, when it's like, no, that's not a legitimate example or evidence for that. And when it comes down to like the fine tuning, how everything is perfect, which she mentions here just briefly, they say that the fine tuning, if something's off just a little bit, if our atmosphere was off just a little bit, we would not be able to survive. Yeah,
we are literally in the only perfect. If we were a mile closer to Venus, we would be on fire. If we were a mile further out, we would be frozen. And that's what people don't understand. The perfection of where the Earth is to our sun. There's no other way that would make sense besides our God creating the Earth. It just, and that is where, like we talked about before, you just have to believe. There's no proof. You can't prove that just how it worked out, though. We just got within a mile that just worked.
Everything somehow just aligned perfectly, and the odds of that happening are next to impossible. A couple illustrations, so for fun, for those of you who like illustrations. So One say, it'd be like a million monkeys banging on a million typewriters and expecting a Shakespearean sonnet to emerge out of that chaos. Another illustration, probably my favorite, especially in Kansas, is be like a tornado going through a trailer park and leaving behind it not death and destruction, but a perfectly built Boeing 747. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think she's going with this is there's a point to where you're gonna have to take this proof. Do you believe it or not?
Yes.
And
as a culture, it's so important. Sorry, I'm going to cut.
No, you're fine. No, yeah, go ahead.
Is that the reason why we're in a postmodern society right now? So modernism thought, the presumption was, with all this investment in science and philosophy, we should be able to explain everything in the world. Well, come to find out, biology and physics and chemistry only goes so far. It really doesn't give us meaning, purpose, and understanding, which is why theology, up until a couple of decades ago, was known as queen of the sciences, helping us make sense of all this stuff. To the point now we have post-modernity, where now it's, since, we can't find meaning and purpose out of that stuff, now it's up to me to determine. And so now we have all this individual views on morality, ethics, the right and wrong, and, based on feelings and emotions. And of course, it seems like things are in chaos, because since everyone's judging everything off of their standard and not without any objective standard, of course, we're going to get along less. But we're going to also have this more partisanship, and have this us versus them mentality. And of course, then once you're done defeating those people, then you actually end up turning on yourselves.
Yeah, and we don't need that anymore in the world. So hopefully this helps.
Yes. So and one quote I actually have in my notes here, I want to make sure I share, because it's a John Lennox quote, because I love John Lennox so much. Nonsense is still nonsense, even if said by world famous scientists.
Yeah. That is true.
That was one thing I thought about, and I wrote it down. I was like, I want to share this because it's one of those great quotes. Nonsense is still nonsense, even when spoken by world famous scientists.
And the problem is science is so your opinion. I'm no scientist by any means, but this is what I believe. You can have two scientists get the same exact results from the exact experiment. One will say it worked, and one says it doesn't. It's all in the hands of the beholder. And
that's why peer review is so important, which sometimes gets skipped over. Or, they look at me like, what you did, their conclusion agrees with my worldview, and so I'm going to put my stamp on it, even though a deeper look at the results may actually say otherwise.
And but it's all in the hands of the beholder. But I feel we are getting closer to hopefully being figuring out.
And I was looking back at our book. Excuse me. I saw here the quote from Stephen Hawking about gravity being the proof how everything got created. And that's actually what the quote that reminded me of the John Lennox quote, because it presupposes stuff that's already there. I mean, if the universe had being, so before, there was a time when the universe didn't exist, and so there was no time, matter, or space. And he's like, well, gravity and all this stuff, whipped together is like, whoa. If there was a point where there was no time, matter, or space, where's all that stuff coming from? So that's one of those things that's that nonsense kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think we just keep hitting that back. There's something higher than us that had to do something. I just think of energy, from science class. Energy, there's no loss of energy. It just gets moved to something else. And so you don't just get energy out of nothing. And that's right there should prove something had to do something to create our universe. It just doesn't spontaneously out of an atom or whatever they're trying to say now. It just doesn't make sense, in my opinion. Again, I'm no scientist, but
I'm no scientist,
but that's my opinion, and that's what I'm sticking to.
So like I said at the beginning, the thing she touches on is so good, So important.
Yeah.
But if you really want to go into it, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of great stuff out there. Of course, you got to watch out for the bad stuff. But all goes to, I think, supports her point that if there's a God of the universe who created the universe, then, coming to Earth as a child is no big challenge. And what is really cool is that with the prophecies in the Old Testament, he was planning it and thinking about it for a long time.
Yeah.
So that he could come save us because he loved us.
Yeah. Yes.
And so the last section there, what about the guiding star? No big deal.
Yeah.
And God can create a temporary light.
For sure.
And it goes to another thing I actually saw on TikTok where someone had studied, one of the times in the Bible where it talks about the sun was darkened. And, of course, the skepticism is, well, maybe it was just an eclipse by the moon. Well, an astronomer did the research, found out that the moon is on the wrong side for there to be an eclipse. So how did the earth get dark, which was reported by a historian about an event in Israel that happened, years before. So, I mean, there's something that other cultures have to also take a notice on, something that happens that, like the sun being darkened.
Yeah, it's definitely doable.
Yes.
So,
but really, but also, it's cool because part of it, theologically, with these, the wise men, these astronomers who come to see Jesus shortly after he's born, was also a sign that God is, he's including the Gentiles in his saving plan. And so,
like what we talked about in chapter 1, just, he had men and women, rich and poor, slaves and clergy, bringing everyone together to show that this is the light of the world. Yes. Like this is the Son of God.
Not for one group of people, but for everybody. And that's where one of my favorite Old Testament books is Isaiah, where it just keeps hammering. It's like, I'm going to draw the nations to me. I'm going to raise the valleys, I'm going to flatten the mountains, and I'm bringing all people to me. And of course, 10 chapters later, hey, by the way, I'm bringing it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use this servant that you're talking about. Of course, Jesus is the servant that talks about. And so it's just mind blowing how God had this all planned out. And of course, people miss it. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about this and, share the gospel, and why Christmas should continue to be a big deal, because, the fact that God created everything, created us, who are we, little Lord, the angels, to be noticed by him, to be at the point where it's like he's going to come as a vulnerable little child and show us, who he is, what it means to be truly human, and offer us salvation by the way of the cross, and not just salvation for here on earth, but for an eternity. Yeah, that I think is going to be so mind blowing and awesome. We can't even come close to scratching the surface.
Yeah, the ultimate sacrifice.
So it comes, ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah. So
at the end of the chapter, it's a great question. Choose your miracle. Christians believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. Atheists believe in the virgin birth of the universe. Choose your miracle. Yeah. I'm going to choose the virgin birth of Jesus.
Yeah. And I think we've probably beat that whole question down and kind of where we believe. And I agree. The virgin birth of Jesus makes a whole lot more sense than the virgin birth of the universe. Yes. It's just a lot more. I think it'd be a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Kind of like what we talked about. Was it last chapter? Or no, it's chapter 1 too. Like making up the story of going for the census. Like there's a lot easier.
Yeah. There have been a lot easier ways to make up a story.
Yeah. So.
Not be proven wrong. Oh, goodness. All right, guys. A couple announcements before we wrap up here. So Tyler and I, of course, planning on next steps after we do this. And so we're going to do the Bible recap next year. Yeah. Details to come on a start date. In fact, we're going to invite a couple others to join us for our
We'll have special guests. Yeah.
Yes. And so it's going to be a nice, good roundtable discussion. Of course, we'll be right here. So if you would like to participate, again, it's the Bible recap. There's daily readings, and we're going to engage in the weekly discussion guide. There's other materials available with the Bible recap, but we're just going to go through the dailies and the weekly discussions as far as in our group here. Now, if you would rather be in person, I would invite you to grab 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 friends, and you guys can get together, and you can purchase the discussion guide for yourselves, and then you can guys have your own little round table. This is just our way to try to include people who may not have the opportunity to get together with others. And then the other announcement I just want to say, make sure you hit that like button, that share button. And as Tyler mentioned just a moment ago, if you guys got any questions, comments, book ideas, or you had a question about a book title or author, please put that in the comment section below. We
love to do these. I love these, and I loved our Lee Strobel one. It just opens our eyes so much to the little things that you don't really think of. So feel free, like I said, like, comment, all the fun stuff. We hope to see you next time.
Yep, chapter 4.
Yeah.
Take care, and God bless.
Bless you.